I recently finished a 1-year grad program at a biomedical engineering company, and I thought it might be worthwhile to reflect on what it was like for anyone else in uni or just starting out their career in biomedical engineering, or really any other engineering, or just anyone interested. So, for a bit of context, the company that I did the grad program at is a contract developer and manufacturer of medical devices. Before I started working, I didn't really know what that meant. Well, I might have been able to tell you what a manufacturer is, but probably not a contract developer. Basically, a contract developer is an external company who's hired by someone to develop a product for them. So a client will come to us with an idea of a product, and we'll try to make it. Usually what this looks like is us trying to gather all of the user requirements. The client isn't typically 100% sure what those requirements are. Then we'll generate a few concepts that should meet those requirements, make a prototype of the best option, test it to see where it falls short, and then iterate to get to a point where it meets the user requirements. Now, what would normally happen if they just went to a contract developer rather than a contract developer and manufacturer is that the client would then take the prototype and try to manufacture it themselves, or they'd find a separate company that specializes in manufacturing to manufacture it. But the place I'm working is not just a contract developer, they're also a manufacturer. So through the product development phase, we try to design the product in a way that lines up with the in-house manufacturing capabilities. The benefit of being a contract developer and also a manufacturer is that we can get a product from concept to the point of high volume manufacturing much more quickly than if it was done at two different companies. And for a lot of the clients who are coming out with new products, time to market is really important to them. Cool, so now we know what a contract developer and manufacturer is. It would be good to know what type of products we're developing and manufacturing. The type of medical devices that the place I work at specializes in. It's getting really weird not saying the name of the company, so I'm just going to make up a name. Medical Test Engineering Company. Bit wordy. We'll go with MedTest Co. So MedTest Co specializes in diagnostics, so that would be anything where you put in a sample of blood, urine, nasal swab, anything like that, and the device tests for some disease or illness and spits out a result of whether the sample was positive or negative. This means that MedTest Co employs a lot of mechanical, mechatronics, and process engineers, as well as biomedical engineers, and a lot of scientists to figure out all the chemistry and biology behind diagnosing a disease. Now, back to the grad program. How the grad program worked was that you moved through the company, spending time in different departments and teams, working through different projects at all different stages of development. From the very early conceptual stuff, all the way up to successful products that are on the market and are having their second or third production line set up. From an engineering perspective, there are two departments, product development and manufacturing, and then within these departments there are different teams. In product development, there is development and NPI, and in manufacturing, there are manufacturing and automation. Over the course of the year, I would spend time in all those departments and give a presentation to the company, talking about my contributions to the business and what I've learned. I spent 4 months in development, 4 months in NPI, 2 months in manufacturing, and 2 months in automation. The reason why I spent so much more time in product development than manufacturing is because I was hired as a product development grad. Out of all the grads, some were hired for product development and some were hired for manufacturing. The product development grads spent 8 months in product development and 4 months in manufacturing, and the manufacturing grads did the reverse, spending 8 months in manufacturing and 4 months in product development. I think the reasoning behind this was that they wanted us to spend more time in the roles that we would actually be doing long term, but also still get an understanding of the function of the other teams in the company. There are a bunch of departments outside of engineering too, and I interacted with them, but I wasn't too closely involved with them. They were production, bioscience, R&D, procurement, quality, and there's probably more business-related departments that I'm forgetting. So first off, I was in development. The development team was responsible for the initial interactions with the client, getting all of the user requirements, coming up with concepts, testing the concepts, and generating a prototype of a product that meets the client's needs. During my time in development, I worked on 2 smaller projects. One was a pneumatic-based project for a very high-profile client, which was awesome. The other one was a manifold for a cell sorter for a startup out of California. On the pneumatics project, it was a very small team, just me and the principal scientist from the R&D department, with some help on the PCB design from a development engineer. The manifold was a bigger team, with me and a development engineer doing most of the testing, a design engineer helping with the CAD, 2 NPI engineers working on COGS estimates and production line setup, and a development team leader mostly focused on timeline and management. On the pneumatics project, I was responsible for carrying out a lot of the testing of different supply channel geometries to measure the air pressure drop across the channel, and testing of the electrical response of some areas of the circuit that were critical to the function of the device. During the testing phase, I also had to present the findings to the client every 2 weeks. I also wrote a simple Python program that let you control the prototype device from within the command line. I had a lot of fun working on this project because it was just me and the principal scientist from the R&D team, who was a super friendly and knowledgeable guy. And since it was just the 2 of us, I got to make a lot more of a contribution than maybe I would have if it was a bigger team. I didn't really like presenting to the client because I would get nervous and forget to say things, or blank out under pressure and just not understand the question that they'd asked me. But it's a good skill to develop, and I probably just need to practice more. On the manifold project, my main role was testing out different vent materials to try to find one that could meet the client's requirements. This meant meeting with different suppliers to try to identify potential vents, and then testing these materials in the conditions that they would be used. In the end, we weren't able to find a vent that would work for the conditions the client was asking for, but we were able to talk to the client and get them to relax the user requirements on that one, and then we were able to meet the new requirement. I think that was an important lesson for me. You need to know how the device is going to be used and then challenge the user requirements if they seem unreasonable. For the manifold, I also did some testing on various medical grade glues and had some input in the initial concept design. After I finished my stint with the development team, I had to give a presentation on what my experience had been like, what I'd learned, and how I'd contributed. And, of course, the whole company was invited to attend. I think a little over 100 people tuned in, probably 30 to 40 in person, and the rest online. I was super nervous, but it ended up going fine. I talked about the pneumatics project and how my software meant that we didn't need to use an expensive instrument to interface with the device, you could just use a laptop. The presentation went well and everyone was very encouraging. Next, I was off to NPI, where I got involved with the biggest product development project running at the time, a blood test, this time for a client who had just secured $100 million in funding. There were probably 50 engineers working on this project, which is by far the biggest project I've ever worked on. My second biggest project was a group project with 5 people at uni, so it was really cool working with a team of this size for the first time. My role was in process development, establishing the manufacturing process for getting the reagents onto the part. What this meant was setting up the dispense machine so that an operator only had to load the part, press run, and then take the part to the next station. We needed to use the equipment in a way that it wasn't designed for in order to achieve the necessary throughput to meet the manufacturing volume requirements, which presented some challenges. I worked closely with the supplier of the dispenser to modify the software so that the equipment could meet our performance needs. I also had to write a lot of documentation for quality and traceability purposes.
Wazowski, you didn't file your paperwork.
And I had to train 3 operators on how to perform the process. Part of the documentation process involved meeting with stakeholders from all over the company to get everyone's sign-off that the manufacturing process would produce high-quality parts safely. A lot of work went into optimization to keep the cycle time as low as possible. I worked with the design team to develop prototype jigs, and then the automation team to develop jigs for higher volumes. By the time I was finished in NPI, my process was being used to produce up to 200 parts a day, which was awesome to see. So after my 4 months of NPI, it was time to present to the company again about my experience and contribution. I talked about all the work I'd done on the dispenser and showed the improvements to cycle time as different changes were implemented. This presentation went okay, but I lost my place and had to take a minute to remember what I was saying, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but all of the other grads gave really good presentations, so it was mildly embarrassing, but it is what it is. Next, I moved into the manufacturing department. The culture in manufacturing was very different. I think this is because most of the manufacturing engineers were a lot older than the product development engineers. If I had to estimate the median age for a manufacturing engineer, it's probably early to mid 40s, whereas the product development engineers were late 20s to early 30s. In manufacturing, one of the things I worked on was qualifying a piece of equipment that was used to test for leaks in pouches in an upcoming manufacturing line. So these pouches that it was testing were kind of like the wrappers that a muesli bar comes in. It would test the pouches destructively, so you would just do the test initially while you were setting up the pouch sealing machine to make sure that it's sealing the pouches properly. Then you might repeat the test periodically or on a sample of parts from every batch to make sure that they're still sealed properly. So what was involved in qualifying this equipment? I had to test out the equipment to make sure all the parts worked properly. I had to write a list of necessary spare parts, and I had to write up some documentation getting it into the system so that it could be used on GMP production lines. Another thing I worked on was updating the assembly process to address some customer feedback. Basically, there were some parts that weren't assembled properly, and we didn't have a good enough process for checking that the parts were assembled correctly before sending them out. So I had to update the process to include an extra step where the operator checks some critical features of the part, and I took this opportunity to work with the operators to simplify some of the documentation that they were working with. It was really cool to get the operators' input on the current process and improvements, and then see how pleased they were with the updates. I guess they were having a lot of frustration and wasted time with the old documentation. Then I moved on to the automation department, where I mostly worked on making jigs and a chute for the finished products on one of the production lines. I designed the chute to be made out of folded sheet metal, but we didn't have time to wait for an external company to make it, so I split it out into 3 parts and had it 3D printed internally. One of the best things that I learned in the automation department was brass inserts. These guys are great when you need thread in your 3D printed parts. No more dealing with shitty 3D printed thread that breaks almost immediately. I don't know, it might not be that cool, but to me this was revolutionary. Some of the automation guys were working with awesome robots and PLCs, but to my disappointment I wasn't able to get involved with that. But I did get to brush up on my CAD, working on all the jigs and fixtures, which was good. So that pretty much sums up my experience. I guess salary would be interesting. I started off on 71k Australian dollars, but got raises along the way. I guess I can go back and look at my pay slips to see what I actually earn. Okay, so this is it month by month. We can see that January is a little lower. That's because I didn't start the job until partway through Jan. Then in May I got a small pay bump, and in December I got a bonus. So it ended up being 74k all up that I actually earned. And after the grad program finished, I got another couple pay bumps, and now I'm on 82k. And all these numbers are before tax and super have been taken out. So overall not amazing pay, but since I'm early in my career, I guess experience is more important, and hopefully that number will go up soon. Overall, it was a really good experience. I never thought that I would be giving presentations to hundreds of people or working with some of the largest companies in the world. And it was really cool to work on cutting-edge technology to diagnose some of the world's biggest diseases. It was definitely stressful at times trying to get work done in really tight deadlines, and it was hard to get used to working regular hours compared to uni where I would just study whenever I wanted to. But I'm really grateful to have had the experience to work on the really cool projects, and I learned so much new stuff. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. See you next time.